Good morning and welcome back to Blockware Live. I'm your host, Mitchell Askew, and we have a great show for you today. Big show. We've got a lot to talk about, a lot of charts we're going to dive into today. A little bit different of a show than what we've normally done. In the previous weeks, we've been covering breaking news as it relates to Bitcoin, me providing my take on that. But today, we're just going to look at the data. We're going to look at some charts and allow the analytics to tell us what's going on in the market. A lot of people are asking, hey, man, what's going on here? Why is Bitcoin all the way down in the 60,000s? Is this the bottom? What's going on with this war in the Middle East? How does this affect Bitcoin? So today we're going to look at the charts and we're going to see what they have to say. But before we get into it, make sure to smash the like button, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And make sure you're following Blockware on X and follow myself on X as well. And also, I mentioned this last week, but Blockware is offering a limited time promotion. It's only valid while Bitcoin's under $75,000 per coin. And we all know a 10% daily candle is nothing for Bitcoin. So we're within striking distance of 75K. So if you want to mine Bitcoin at 7 cents per kilowatt hour and get 1 free month of power and discounted pricing on your miners, then now's the time. Make sure to click the link in the description, or you can go to blockwaresolutions.com/promo, fill out the form there. A member of our team will be in contact and will help you get started with Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining's great. You get cash flow, you can build a Bitcoin treasury, and you get 100% depreciation on the mining hardware itself. So if you have a large income tax liability, tax season's coming up. It's too late for 2025, but it's not too late for 2026. So as you're writing that check to Uncle Sam or sending the IRS a direct deposit, remember, you could have lowered that bill and stacked Bitcoin if you were mining Bitcoin. So again, blockwaresolutions.com/promo. All of the details are there. And without further ado, let's talk Bitcoin because that's what we're all here to talk about and hear about. So, there's a war going on in the Middle East right now, and I'm no geopolitical expert. I really don't have a dog in the fight one way or the other, but this type of stuff impacts financial markets, and that's what I care about. How is this going to impact my day-to-day life, and how is this going to impact Bitcoin and the broader market environment? So, what happens during wars? Well, it's a time of uncertainty. Nobody knows what's going to go on. How's this going to impact oil? How's this going to impact different relationships between different nation states? How are said nation states going to change their balance sheet and their financial strategy, their economic plan, right? There's just a lot of question marks that surround conflict and tension. And what do investors do when they have a question mark? When they're uncertain about the future? They tend to buy dollars. And we'll get into why that's ironic, but this is what they do. They rush to what they deem as the most certain, most predictable asset, which is dollars. And so, what we've seen over the past 48 hours is the DXY, the dollar currency index, is up about 2%. We're closer to 1.5, but between 1.5 and 2%. So investors are bidding dollars. Volatility in the equity markets is up. The VIX is up. And surprisingly enough, Bitcoin is holding strong. Now, I say surprisingly, not because I'm a Bitcoin bear. Everyone listening to this knows I'm as bullish Bitcoin as anyone, if not more so. More so. But what we've seen in the past when tensions break out, when violence erupts in the world, Bitcoin tends to drop. Why? Because it is traded like a risk on asset. I emphasize the word traded there because fundamentally, people who've studied Bitcoin know it is not a risky asset per se. There are no counterparties. No one can take your Bitcoin from you. No one can change the supply, yada, yada, yada. But it is traded like a risk on asset, something investors sell during times of uncertainty. And Bitcoin specifically tends to get the short end of the stick during moments like this for one primary reason. And it's the fact that Bitcoin is the most liquid asset that is traded 24/7. Excuse me. I'll repeat myself. Bitcoin, of all the assets that are traded 24/7, Bitcoin is by far the most liquid. So any investor anywhere in the world at any time with pretty much any amount of capital can buy and sell Bitcoin all day long, 24/7 on a Saturday night when you find out the United States bombed a country in the Middle East. What can you sell? Really, the only thing you can sell is Bitcoin. You can't sell your treasuries. You can't sell your real estate, obviously. And so Bitcoin is the thing that investors sell because, again, uncertainty, they want dollars. They'll sell what they have to get those dollars. Now, we have seen this work towards Bitcoin's benefit. If something bullish for the markets happens in off hours, investors will buy Bitcoin because it's the only liquid asset that trades 24/7 that they can buy. For example, in 2024, the night President Trump won the election, Bitcoin got bid from 65K all the way up to 75K during the off hours because investors couldn't buy anything and they didn't want to wait for the market to open the following morning or the market. Let's see, the election was on Tuesdays. Yeah, I think the market opened Wednesday morning. It might have been closed though. I digress. Bitcoin was the only thing open in that moment once we found out Trump was going to be the next president. So investors bought Bitcoin, right? They want to buy whatever they can to get long, to get risk on. And so we've seen this work in both directions. But what's interesting right now is Bitcoin's not really selling off, despite other markets and the price of other assets signaling that the market is in fact concerned about this war, right? The VIX has spiked 30% in the week, the dollar is up, and a couple other charts we'll look at. The market is saying, hey, this is a cause for concern. We want to get into a less risk on position, a more risk off position. But Bitcoin itself hasn't really reacted very well, much at all. It's basically flat over the past couple of days. And so we're going to look at some of the charts and, at a high level, what does this mean? I would say that most of the people left holding Bitcoin understand what it is they hold. They're not the type to sell to cash immediately upon uncertain geopolitical news, right? A lot of the tourists have been washed out over the past 4 months. Bitcoin dropped from 125K down to 60K. The people that sold during that period, they're not the long-term Bitcoin holders that are price agnostic, obviously. And so seeing Bitcoin not sell off during an event that all reasonable interpretation you would expect it to sell off is a very bullish sign. Does it mean the bottom's in? Not necessarily, but it's a good indicator that, Bitcoin's going to hold steady here. I tend to agree with what Checkmate's been saying a lot recently, which is that price-wise, we may be at the bottom. It's likely, in fact, but time-wise, we could stagnate here for the next couple of months. I see that as probably the most realistic scenario at this point, but we'll break everything down here. I'm going to switch to the screen share and we'll get into some charts. So first things first, like I mentioned, the DXY, the dollar index, is up about 1.6% over the past 5 days. So we're looking at a 5-day interval here. Obviously, the markets were closed over the weekend. So you can see here since, I guess the Forex market doesn't really close, but since Saturday, which is when all of the tensions in the Middle East escalated, the dollar has been straight up and to the right. So investors, it's uncertain times, they want dollars. Now, like I mentioned, Bitcoin not really taking a big hit here. You can see this is the initial sell-off right here. Bitcoin dropped from around, let me switch off the percent. Bitcoin's at literally at the time of me saying this, 0.02% change in the last 5 days. So basically stagnant. But if we switch back to the numbers here, you can see Bitcoin sold off from about 65K to 63.3K upon the immediate breaking news of the conflict. But after that, Bitcoin went straight back up. Now, I don't normally like to look at charts of Bitcoin this zoomed in, right? I'm used to looking at the 5-year view at least, if not more. But how's Bitcoin reacting to this news? Well, it really doesn't care. And it's not because investors don't care about this, right? It's because the people still holding Bitcoin, they understand what it is they hold. It's a finite asset that has a decentralized rule set, right? It's rules with no rulers. It is the first and only finite digital asset that you can have bearer custody. You can physically own Bitcoin with no counterparties the same way I'm physically holding this highlighter, right? This isn't an IOU. It's not someone saying, hey, I owe you this, like it is when you have dollars in a bank account or equities in a brokerage account, right? Another entity is holding those assets for you. And under whatever circumstances, if you can call me tinfoil hatted crazy conspiracy theorist, those assets could be seized from you. Bitcoin can't be taken from you if you're custodying it in the right way. The same way that this highlighter in my hand can't be taken from me unless someone physically tries to remove it. Bitcoin's the same way, but it exists digitally. It is a digitally native asset that has that property. Mind blowing. First of its kind. So again, Bitcoin hasn't really sold off. If we look at some of the other charts, like the VIX here, up 27% in the last 5 days, or last 24 hours, really. Let's switch to the percent. So 40% since Thursday, and just since the Monday open, which would be right here on the chart. It gapped up on Monday. Since the Friday close, the VIX is up about 37%. Obviously, a turbulent time in the market indeed. If we look at the S&P 500, it's down 3% over the past 5 days. It gapped down on Monday and it gapped down again today. And then if we look at the NASDAQ, similar story, down about 3%. Even gold is being sold off, which historically, gold has been another asset that investors rush to during times of uncertainty. But gold's down 5% in the past 5 days. Investors are opting for dollars during this time of uncertainty. It's a little less surprising considering gold has been on this absolute monstrous rally over the last year. And it's an interesting sign, though, that gold failed to break its all-time high. Gold peaked in late January, early February at around, I think it was 5,400, sorry, $5,400 an ounce, and got back up to 5,300, but we're seeing it come back down now. So the high might be in for gold, which it's a good sign for Bitcoin, if we're being honest, right? Gold, premier risk off asset, Bitcoin, the premier risk on asset. We'll have to see how things shake out over the next couple of weeks, but I want to switch off of the trading view chart here and not back to rather, but for the first time to some of the on-chain data. And the chart we're looking at here, let me move my face out of the way, is you have the Bitcoin price in black, and then you have the supply of Bitcoin that hasn't moved in at least 1 year in orange. Now, a lot of the charts I'm about to show you, they don't tell us for certain that the Bitcoin bottom is in. We can never know that until the future is the present, right? Until time passes and we can look back with perfect 2020 vision, hindsight is 2020, then we'll know when the bottom is in. But the charts we're looking at are going to show us that whether or not the bottom is in, it is a time to be accumulating Bitcoin. All signs are pointing to the fact that you should be accumulating as much Bitcoin as you can at the current prices. Could Bitcoin go lower? Sure, buy more then. But what we're going to look at these next few minutes is charts that say, hey, you should really be stacking Bitcoin right now. So the first, like I said, the supply last active 1 or more years ago. You may also see this oftentimes in the form of the HODL waves, which looks at every different age cohort. We're specifically looking here at coins 1 year ago or longer, because what is this? This is people that bought Bitcoin at least 1 year or more ago, right? These aren't the top buyers who FOMO'd in 2025. And what we see here is, of course, a giant drop off, a giant sell off back in November of this year when Bitcoin really kind of took off and fell down from the highs. Massive form of capitulation right there. But since then, we have seen this metric slowly grind up, slowly tick a little bit higher. Again, not a crystal ball, not a perfect indicator that says the bottom is in, but it's a trend you want to see if you're a Bitcoin bull, right? You want to see supply start to constrict. You want to see supply concentrated in the wallets of long-term holders, convicted believers in Bitcoin that are willing to ride the asset to zero, to go down with the ship. And we're starting to see the early innings of that, which is a good sign. Now, here's another chart I really like, and let me make sure this is the updated view. Yes, this is from this past week. So, what we're looking at here, there's a lot of different colors and lines and stuff going on the screen. So, I'll try to explain it as simply as possible. Again, you have the Bitcoin price in black, and then in orange, what you have is the supply of Bitcoin held by entities on the chain that have between 0.01 Bitcoin and one whole Bitcoin. So a million sats to one whole Bitcoin. And I would categorize this, I have the chart labeled as the plebs, but you could simply think retail investors. This is the same cohort of people I was talking about previously. They're willing to go down with the ship. And that's their total aggregate holdings is in orange. And in green, we're looking at the 14-day change. So we can see over the past 2 weeks, have they been buying or selling in the aggregate? And if so, by how much? And then in the blue line, just for reference, it's pegged to the same axis. I have the daily inflation rate of Bitcoin or the daily issuance, the amount of new Bitcoin entering circulation via Bitcoin miners. That's in the blue line, and we have another 14-day moving average applied to that. And what we've seen historically, and this was an epic moment at the time, was back in December of 2022. You see this huge spike in the green. That's the 14-day change in the pleb holdings. And what it told us is they were smash buying the dip, and we could see it on chain. It was a brilliant sight to behold, truly. The smallest buyers on the network, the ones who arguably need Bitcoin the most, they bought the dip in force. They bought the bottom with the house. And this is what we would expect to see at a Bitcoin bottom, right? If we think about it in a first principles term, not to overuse that terminology, but if we try to really think about it from a practical, logical standpoint, what would you see at a Bitcoin bottom? Well, you would see all the people that have laser eyes and are saying, yeah, I'm going to buy and hold Bitcoin for 50 years. They would be the only people left in the market, right? All of the people that are either trading Bitcoin, they may be generally bullish, but it's too volatile for them to hold consistently, so they trade in and out, or simply the speculators, the tourists that FOMO bought in at the top. Both of those cohorts would be out of the market. You'd be left with only the people or the institutions that view Bitcoin as a long-term, decade plus buy and hold. Those would be it. Because Bitcoin is incredibly volatile relative to other assets. And so, unless you have conviction, deep, true conviction to hold it for many years, you're probably not going to make it from 125K down to 60K or 69K down to 16, right? It takes a special breed of human who deeply understands the asset to hold and not just hold, but buy more during these drawdowns. And so this is exactly what we saw during 2022, and we're starting to see it again now. So these plebs have been smash buying Bitcoin. Now, what's interesting, I'll switch to the next chart here. This is the same thing, but on a dollarized basis. So when we're looking at it here, we're looking at their holdings in Bitcoin terms. So this cohort of users holds between 1.3 and 1.4 million Bitcoin. And over the past 14 days, we've seen them acquire about 750 Bitcoin per day. Not a lot in terms of total trading volume, I understand that, but it is an indicator that they're buying the dip. But what makes this interesting is, of course, when Bitcoin was 16K, they're going to be able to buy way more Bitcoin. You see here, you can see on the left side Y axis that at the peak they were acquiring over 3,000 Bitcoin a day. Well, it costs far less capital to buy 3,000 Bitcoin when Bitcoin's under 20K versus the current prices. And so by looking at it on a dollarized basis, which is what this chart shows, it's the same thing, that 14-day change, but instead of in terms of Bitcoin, in terms of dollars, you can see here that they are deploying almost as much on a dollarized basis as they did at the 2022 bottom. So again, take every metric kind of at face value. None of them mean, hey, the bottom is for sure in if we're seeing similar trends, but it's something to keep an eye on, and you want to view it through the entire scope of the broader macro landscape as well as other metrics relevant to Bitcoin. inversely, you can see here when they sold the top. This to me is very interesting, right? You had this cohort of diehard Bitcoiners accumulating gradually throughout all of 2023 and most of 2024, and then they got their payday, right? Once the lame duck period happened, when President Trump won the election and everybody was super optimistic about his administration, super bullish Bitcoin, and Bitcoin went to 100K. You can see here, yeah, these users sold off. Of course they did. There was a lot of sell pressure at $100,000. If you look at it on a Bitcoinized term, you can see here only two instances in which this cohort actually has been a net seller in the past 5 years, 4 or 5 years. It was when Bitcoin returned to $75,000 at an all-time high before the halving, and then it was when Bitcoin broke 100K for the first time. So you can see they're willing to buy, hold, accumulate Bitcoin throughout long periods of consolidation and price declines, and then they're going to wait. They will wait until it makes sense to sell at least a portion of their stack. Obviously, they're not unloading the whole bag, but they are selling some. But what we've seen here, they're accumulating even more aggressively than they were before. So that's a good sign. The people left in the market know what they hold. Now, lastly, we're going to look at a few more charts that again tell us the same thing. Now, these are about 2 weeks old. So if you're looking at the price and you say that's not where we're at today, that's why. But they all tell the same story. Now, the first here is the short-term holder cost basis. This is a very popular on-chain metric. What it looks at is the average buy price for people that have bought Bitcoin in the past 6 months. And generally, this is a really good short-term indicator on whether or not Bitcoin's in a bull or bear market. And historically, when Bitcoin trades below the short-term holder cost basis, fantastic time to deploy more capital. Now, you may look at this period in 2022 and say, hey, that's a red flag that raises cause for concern, right? Because Bitcoin dropped below it early 2022. It might actually even be late 2021 there. And then upon its first revisit with the metric, it did not break through the resistance and stayed below it for about little over a whole year, right? It wasn't until the end of 2022 that it actually broke over that metric. So could that be the environment we're in today? Maybe. Right now the short-term holder cost basis is steadily heading towards 80K, and it's obviously going to continue to drop lower unless the Bitcoin price rises from here. I would expect the next sort of encounter between the price and this on-chain metric to take place in the next probably 2 months around 70 to 75K. I think that'll be a pivotal moment to, let us know where the market may be headed in the quarter after that. But regardless, it's signaling, hey, now is a great time to start stacking sats because we saw in 2024 and even briefly in 2025, yes, Bitcoin dropped below this metric, but not for long. And if you bought sats in those periods, you of course did very well. And then that's the same chart. Lastly, I want to show the MVRV Z score. So this is a very high level metric. It looks at rather than the cost basis of specifically short-term holders, the cost basis of the market as a whole. We're really getting very close to that aggressive buy zone. But this metric is slightly flawed and it's going to become less valuable over time. And the reason being, lost coins dilute the actual realized price. So I'll show you what I mean here. This orange line it's the same thing, right? It's the market value to realized value ratio. But the green line we're looking at here, and hopefully you guys can see it okay on the chart. If you're watching on mobile, you might have a hard time. So I'll try to describe it as best I can, like a baseball commentator, or calling the game on the radio. Assuming you can't see this, there's a green line that goes up and to the right, and this is the realized cap, which is the total amount of capital put into the Bitcoin network. And it's based on how much Bitcoin was bought and at what price. Now, the reason this is flawed, like I said, is because lost coins over time are dragging that average down in sort of an unrealistic fashion, right? It's giving a misrepresentation of the real quote unquote cost basis for the network, right? If someone bought 1,000 Bitcoin at $1 each. That's only $1,000 of realized cap, and that's going to bring the realized price, which is the average cost basis, down. But that doesn't really provide any signal, right? Because those coins are not liquid if they're lost. They're at no risk of actually re-entering the supply. So that's something to keep in mind when we're looking at the ratio, right? Because there's a very likely chance that this MVRV ratio, wherever Bitcoin does bottom, if this ends up being the bottom, or if we bottom out at 54K or whatever, it probably won't reach as low as it did during previous bear market bottoms. That would be my guess. And then additionally, in this orange area shade, I'm just simply looking at the 90-day change in realized cap. So over the last quarter, how much capital has either inflowed into Bitcoin on chain or outflowed. And we're seeing the first net outflow since 2022, which is a sign, hey, you need to be accumulating, right? Anytime historically where we've seen realized cap on a 90-day basis draw down, one, this tells us capital is fleeing from the Bitcoin network in the aggregate, although right now at a very minuscule clip. So it tells us there's capitulation, and it also has historically signaled buy, buy, buy. Credible buying opportunity. And I'll hop off the screen share here because I think that was the last chart I wanted to show you guys. And the TLDR is this is the opportunity that the Bitcoin class of 2024 and 2025 have been waiting for. As someone who entered Bitcoin in late 2020, early 2021, the 2022 bear market was an absolute gift for me. And I won't elaborate any further, but this is the gift for people that got in Bitcoin within the past 2 years. Many people said Bitcoin wouldn't drop below 100,000 again. And I'll be honest, I myself was surprised that it did. But nevertheless, here we are at 60K. And Bitcoin, the long term thesis has never been more solid. The 21 million supply cap is not changing, and the adoption is up and to the right. If you wanted to boil Bitcoin down to two metrics, supply and demand, like any asset, right? And supply is fixed and demand is steadily increasing. And the demand isn't your boomer uncle who makes fun of you when Bitcoin's down 50%, but is suspiciously silent when Bitcoin's up 100%. No, that's not the demand, and it doesn't need to be. The demand is coming from the most powerful, well-capitalized institutions in the world, the BlackRocks, the Fidelities, the Vanguards, the Charles Schwabs of the world, the President of the United States and his own children, his own titan of industry family is all in on Bitcoin. I don't think you really need many more signals that Bitcoin's not going anywhere when the most powerful institutions in the world are getting their feet wet with it. And so don't be the guy who sells your Bitcoin at 60K right as we're entering quantitative easing, right as Bitcoin's really arguably going to go through the final phase of its monetization. Because at one point in the future, Bitcoin won't have these explosive bull runs. It will no longer have the extreme asymmetry risk reward profile that it does right now. It's not going to last forever, but if you got into the Bitcoin in the last 2 years, this is your chance. So you got to be accumulating as much Bitcoin as you can at these prices. Stay cash flow positive. Don't take out any bad liabilities. A lot of people were taking out these Bitcoin loans at 120K. If you were ever going to take out a Bitcoin loan, I mean, not financial advice, but now would be the time, right? But bad liabilities are short to maturity, high interest rates, high liquidation points, right? You want to try to avoid that. But if you can get favorable terms of credit, do what you got to do. Make a prudent decision, and of course, consult with your financial advisor, professional, whatever. But now's the time to be stacking some serious corn. So I'm going to leave it at that. Hopefully, you got some value out of this. I tried to just be as objective as possible looking at the data. Let me know what you think. I'm actually going to switch to restream here and look and see if we've got any comments because I've been reading the chat after the fact. No chats. Come on, guys. Let's leave some comments down below next time, and I'll try to read through them at the end. I don't want to do it as I'm streaming because obviously that can cause a distraction, but we will read the chats after the fact. hopefully you guys can see it. It's looking like when I pull up the stream, it says Blockware Live starting soon. I hope that I didn't just go live and you guys not see this. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to leave a like, smash the comment, smash the like button, and leave a comment down below. And again, blockwaresolutions.com/promo. You can check out the promo while Bitcoin is under 75K, which might not be for long. So we'll see you guys on